We are continuing in our series called The Pursuit of Generosity is the Path of Happiness. And we talked last week about how generosity, if we want to experience happiness, which is what we all want to experience, I believe you want to experience happiness. I want to experience happiness. I want to experience this deep satisfaction. And even though we have a right to pursue happiness, happiness comes through the actual pursuit of generosity. And as we pursue generosity and the practice of generosity, we begin to experience happiness in a way that doesn't come through just pursuing happiness or just pursuing money. Today, we're going to be talking about another subject related to generosity and money. Does anybody remember watching Lord of the Rings? Anybody remember watching Lord of the Rings? It came out. I would ask if any of you read the Lord of the Rings, but only one of you would say yes. So, I think the rest of us are like, yeah, we waited decades for it to come out onto a movie. And were you with the first time, the first episode, I don't know if it's an episode, but one came out, and you got to the end of it, and the friend you were with didn't realize, like, this was more to come. And they're like, this is it? Are you kidding me? When does the next one come out? And we're like, next Christmas. And like, I have to wait a whole year. I was like, yeah, and it's not even complete either. So, welcome. So Lord of the Rings is great. It's a part, but one of the characters in Lord of the Rings is Gollum. Gollum is this creature. This was once, his name used to be Smeagol. And Smeagol was an ordinary hobbit-like creature. And on his birthdays, Smeagol discovered the One Ring, the powerful object of immense value. And consumed by greed, he murdered his friend to take the ring. And this act of violence marked the beginning of his moral and spiritual decay. Now, Smeagol's obsession with the ring grew, and over time, it transformed him physically and mentally. He became a twisted creature, a Gollum. And living in darkness and isolation, consumed by his love for the ring, which he called my precious. The ring gave him unnatural long life, but robbed him of his identity, peace, and relationships. Even as Gollum sought to reclaim the ring after losing it to Bilbo Baggins, he displayed moments of inner conflict. Part of him, the Smeagol, longed for redemption, longed for companionship. But the other part, Gollum, remained enslaved to the ring's power. And this duality shows how greed can dominate a person, suppressing their better nature. In the end, Gollum's insatiable greed led to his downfall. He regained the ring briefly, but blinded by obsession, fell into the fires of Mount Doom and was destroyed along with the ring. His relentless pursuit of the ring cost him everything: his life, his soul, and any chance of redemption. Today, we're going to be talking about greed. We're going to be talking about greed and how to watch out for greed. Jesus says this in Luke chapter 12, verses 13 through 14. I don't have this on the screen, but Luke chapter 12, verse 13 through 14 says this. Someone from the crowd said to Jesus, "Teacher, tell my brother to divide the inheritance with me." Can you just picture for a moment? You're sitting in a crowd, some random crowd member you don't even know. He's like, "Teacher, my brother's got all the inheritance. Tell him to split it with me." Like, this is becoming a real story now. You're like, okay, I think I know a family like that. I'm not going to claim it's mine, but there's another family maybe like that. "Teacher, tell my brother to split the inheritance with me." And what does Jesus say? He says, "Friend," he said to him, "who appointed me a judge or arbitrator over you?" I love that statement, as if Jesus is not judge or arbitrators, like, yeah, you're kind of God. That's part of your role and responsibility. But it was almost like, hey, you're talking about an earthly thing going on here. This isn't, you need to go find someone local. Go find the local judge. Figure this out on your own. But on the way, he says this, but then he told them, watch out and be on guard against all greed, because one's life is not in the abundance of his possessions. Watch out for greed. For your life, the life you want to live, the life you want to experience is not found in the accumulation of possessions. Greed, as we saw in Gollum, greed is an intense, selfish desire for something, particularly wealth and power or possessions, and beyond what is necessary or even fair. Greed, it demands our excessive focus, our acquiring more, without a care for how it impacts others. And it ultimately never satisfies. It never satisfies because it is me-centered rather than we-centered. I've got to get mine before everyone else. Greed is insatiable. We want happiness. We want to pursue happiness. But greed strips us of our happiness. It sucks the life out of us. It takes over control of our minds, our bodies, our actions, our treatment of others, even our treatment of ourselves. Greed hijacks our goals and directions and leaves us stranded at a destination that we don't want to be, and we don't know how we got here. Greed is a thief that convinces you and me to amass the most amount of possessions and then robs us of the most amount of joy. Jesus says, watch out for greed, for your life is not found in the accumulation of possessions. The pursuit of possessions does not lead to happiness. The pursuit of generosity is the path to happiness. Last week we looked in Matthew chapter 6, and we talked about the first part of storing up for ourselves treasures in heaven. And we talked about what that looked like. And then we talked about what it looks like to store up treasures on earth, and how we tend to be focused on storing up treasures on earth, and how they really don't lead to the happiness that we're really looking for. And so as we review this, Matthew chapter 6, verse 19 through 24, Jesus says this, don't store up for yourselves treasures on earth, where moth and rust destroy, and where thieves break in and steal. But store up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where neither moth nor rust destroys, and where thieves don't break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. He goes on to say, the eye is the lamp of the body. And if your eye is healthy, your whole body will be full of light. But if your eye is bad, your whole body will be full of darkness. So if the light within you is darkness, how deep is that darkness? No one can serve two masters, since either he will hate one and love the other, or he will be devoted to one and despise the other. You cannot serve both God and money. Let's look at Matthew chapter 6, verses 22 and 23. Talking about the eye. Listen to this. Just a reminder here. The eye is the lamp of the body. If your eye is healthy, your whole body will be full of light. But if your eye is bad, your whole body will be full of darkness. So if the light within you is darkness, how deep is that darkness? What we learn here is that our perception of our eye affects the condition of our heart. Our perception of our eye affects the condition of our heart. I grew up in Texas. I grew up playing football. I'm not saying I was the best football player, but in ninth grade, I remember going out, and I remember now we got beyond middle school football, junior high football, and we had wide receivers, and I wanted to be a wide receiver. I wanted to run, and I wanted to catch the ball. I felt like I could do that. I cannot throw the ball, but I can catch the ball. So I'm going to do that, and I go out at two-a-days, and two-a-days is where you practice 2 times a day, all right? That's in the morning and in the evening time. Sometimes we had to practice at 5 in the morning because of Texas heat, so that we weren't passing out. And so we would do these two-a-days, and we're playing. And I remember the first week of two-a-days, I would go, and in the wide receiver drills where they're throwing the ball at you, the ball kept going through my hands and hitting my shoulder pads or my helmet. And I kept going. I would go home, and I'd tell Mom, I was like, Mom, I used to be really good at catching the football. And thankfully, my mom believed in me, and she said, maybe there's something wrong with your eyes. Now, I have had eye trouble since 3rd grade. And my teachers were like, Tim, I think you need to sit on the front row in class. And I was like, I don't think I do. I think I'm fine. That's the last place I want to be, is on the front row in class. And back then, like, eyeglasses were like, you stood out if you had eyeglasses. They were not cool eyeglasses. They were like, do you want this pair or this pair? And you're like, neither. And they're like, that's what we got, And so I didn't wear eyeglasses, but it was catching up to me. So sure enough, I go to the doctor, and that time Mom felt like, hey, you're old enough and responsible enough to own contacts. Does anybody remember when you owned a pair of contacts? It was like owning a car. Like, you bought one pair, just 2, 1 for each eye, and it lasted a year, 2 years, depending on how you took care of them, and you didn't damage them. So you can imagine you don't need your 3rd grader or 5th grader just running around with this pair of contacts. So I'm in it. I'm going through this. All of a sudden, they're like, hey, here's a pair of contacts. I'm going through the eye exam. They give me a pair of contacts. I put them in. My mom is threatening that I don't do anything or lose them or tear them or anything. And I'm like, okay, I got this. And I remember walking outside and thinking, what is that in the sky? Are those clouds? A little background music. Are those clouds? And then I looked over and saw the trees, and the trees had leaves on them that I had never seen before. It was just a blob of a tree. Now they have leaves. And all of a sudden, I remember walking out of the doctor's office feeling like, I can see. This is what the world looks like. And I started catching the ball after that when I went back to football. I say that because when we talk about having healthy eyes, when you have a healthy eye and your whole body is full of light, it's because you really see God for who He is. And you see that in God, we have enough. And that God is enough. And until that moment, we look through life, we look through it dimly, we look through it vaguely, we look through it to a degree confused, and we just kind of see blobs of things, but we don't see clearly that when we truly see God, we recognize that He is enough. Our eyes need to be spiritually clear. That's the first thing. The second thing is, Jesus talks about having healthy eyes versus a bad eye. Healthy eyes versus a bad eye. First of all, healthy eye. The Greek word is haplos, which means single, undivided, healthy, sincere. Do you know what else this word healthy eye means? Healthy. It also means generous. Generous. The eye is the lamp of the body. If your eye is generous, your whole body will be full of light. Now, the word bad in bad eye is poneros, which means blindness, corrupt, evil, selfish, greedy. It's the word that describes the evil one, devil, Satan. If your eye is evil and corrupt and selfish and greedy, then your whole body will be full of darkness. So when Jesus was speaking this, you got to understand, he's not speaking this in English. He's speaking this in Greek to the people. This is written for us. And he says, the eye is the lamp of the body. If your eye is generous, your whole body will be full of light. But if your eye is greedy, your whole body will be full of darkness. So if the light within you is darkness, how deep is that darkness? So as we hear this passage talking about the eye, we need to have generous eyes. We need to have a perception of having generous eyes. Because if not, then we have greedy eyes. And we actually, with greedy eyes, we need to fear soul corruption. Soul corruption. Just like with Gollum, his desires all of a sudden were just out of control. He was no longer in control of his desires. He was so taken over by what this ring was doing to him. His values changed. He murdered his friend. He lived in isolation. And even when Bilbo Baggins and his friends came along, he was like, friends, no, my precious. Friends, no, my precious. It was this weird. It was definitely weird as you guys were watching it, or maybe if you read about it. It was like, wow, this guy's schizophrenic. Like, he's all over the place here. Like, he is just so torn. But he wanted friendship, but he felt like his friends wanted to take over his ring. And it was this thing that just all of a sudden just controlled him to the point that you realized his soul was corrupt. His soul was deteriorated. There wasn't much left of him. And here's the thing that we need to know is that being lost is not just a destination of the soul, but it's a condition of the soul. Being lost is not just a destination that you arrive at. It is that you don't want, but it is also the corruption, the condition of our soul. Jesus says in another place, what does it profit a man to gain the whole world, yet lose his soul? Because the perception of our eye affects the condition of our heart. Now, Jesus goes on after talking about how the eye is the lamp, and he says this. He says, no one can serve two masters, since either he will hate one and love the other, or he will be devoted to one and despise the other. Has anybody ever had two bosses at once? Sometimes official. Sometimes someone has made them your boss unofficially. And you're like, I don't know who you are, but you're acting like my older sibling. I don't need you to do that. Like, I've got one boss, and I got to accomplish one goal. And it gets crazy because you feel like, okay, these people are asking for two different things, and I feel pulled in different directions. But I'm also realizing I like this boss more than I like this one. And I'm willing to do things for this boss, and I kind of may despise this one. I really can't. I don't like when this one's walking around the office. I go and hide. I act like I'm on a phone call. Like, there's just something that you're at when you think of, or when you're in that setting of having two bosses. Jesus goes on to say, you cannot serve both God and money. Now, here's what's cool. In the New Testament, the Greek word for money, by the way, if I took 2.5 years of Greek and a year and a half of Hebrew, I'm going to use it. I'm going to come out and act like I know what I'm talking about, okay? So we're doing some Greek study today because I paid money for this, all right? I barely passed both of them, but I'm here and I'm using some Greek words, which was the New Testament language, and Hebrew is our Old Testament language. Okay. The word for money in Greek is kremata, which generally means wealth and possessions. Now, there's another Greek word in the Greek, which is argyrion, which literally means silver, but is also used to refer to money or coins, change. Like, that makes sense. So there's possessions, there's wealth, And then there's silver and there's coins because the coins were made out of silver, most of them, so they were traded. That makes sense, okay? This was the everyday language for money. If we were to say money, do you have any money? Do you have any bills? Do you have any singles? Like, that's what we're thinking. We've got money or change or something, okay? Those are the two words in the Greek. Jesus doesn't use these two words. He doesn't use these two words in this verse. He uses them elsewhere, but not in this verse. He says you cannot serve both God and money. And instead of using one of these two words, which would have been common Greek words for the term money, he used the term mammon. Now, what is mammon? It comes from the Aramaic word mammon, which means money. But in Aramaic, it had morphed into something else. The Greek word in Matthew 6:24, mamona, which only occurs in one other passage in Scripture and means the same thing as it means here. It is derived from an Aramaic word, mammon, meaning wealth or property, and over time it came to symbolize the idolization of money and idolizing material wealth as something that competes with our spiritual devotion and our moral values. Some English translations that you have or have had says you cannot serve both God and mammon. Why? Because we saw wealth and greed and materialism being personified as a god. When they heard him say mammon, they realized, okay, he's saying the personification of wealth, the personification of greed, the personification of idolizing wealth and possessions and money. They heard him say this even to the point of saying, what Jesus is saying is you cannot serve God and the god of mammon. Or better yet, they heard him say, you cannot serve God and the god mammon. You know, I'm not going to lie. I'm not into demons. I don't think I want to be into demons. I'm not interested in hanging out with demons. I'm not interested in other gods that may exist and are trying to come at me or whatever. I think I would run faster and closer to God if I encountered a demon. But I think Satan is crafty. And I think he sent wealth and materialism to Tim. Because he knew I wouldn't run from that. He knew I'd be all over that. He knew I would snuggle up with that and give it a big hug and say, can I hang out with you forever? And what Jesus is saying, hey, there's a God, mammon, that's coming after you and is far closer than you think. And you probably hang out with him daily. And Jesus is saying you cannot serve both God and the god mammon. How many of you have been susceptible to an internet scam? I feel bad because it's like, man, they've become crafty over the years. And you're like, is this the IRS reaching out to me? Have they finally come for me? And then you're like, man, I've been trying to get away from them this whole time. Someone told me this one time. I don't have these feelings. But anyway, you're like, okay, they caught up with me. I got to do something. I got to go to the store and buy a gift card, for $400 to give to the IRS, because that makes a lot of sense, And here's what's sad is people are being scammed all the time. They just are. And it's not like we're dumb. Like sometimes you're like, man, it's just they're just preying on dumb people. No, it's any one of us that this can happen. Why? Because it's deceitful. And it promises us something that is not true. The god mammon promises us something that is not true. He deceives us. And the Bible talks about the deceitfulness of wealth. Listen to this. In Matthew 13:22, Jesus says, now the one who sows among the thorns This is the one who hears the word of God, the gospel. But the worries of this age and the deceitfulness of wealth choke out the word, and it becomes unfruitful. In 1 Timothy 6, 9 through 10, Paul says this, "But those who want to be rich fall into temptation," a trap, "and many foolish and harmful desires which plunge people into ruin and destruction. For the love of money is a root of all kinds of evil, and by craving it, some have wandered away from the faith and pierced themselves with many griefs." Proverbs 11:28 says, "Anyone trusting in his riches will fall, but the righteous will flourish like foliage." Ecclesiastes 5:10 says, "The one who loves silver is never satisfied with silver, and whoever loves wealth is never satisfied with income. This too is futile." Proverbs 23, verses 4 and 5 says, "Don't wear yourself out to get rich, because you know better. Stop. As soon as your eyes fly to it, it disappears, for it makes its wings for itself and flies away like an eagle to the sky." Hebrews 13:5 says this, "Keep your life free from the love of money. Be satisfied with what you have. For He Himself has said, 'I will never leave you or abandon you.'" Wealth is deceitful. We need to put to death the god of mammon. Or better yet, put to death the god Mammon. How many since last week were tempted by Amazon? Anybody? Did you get your emails this week? I did. How many of you were tempted in your social media feeds? You're like, yes, Christmas is coming. And what did they do? They're like, hey, this sale runs out tonight at midnight. If you don't buy it now, you will never have it again on sale. And then that happens, and then next thing I know, I get another email from some other organization saying, the sale starts tomorrow for 10 days straight. Go and look at the best sellers. And you're like, yeah, I need to see if I need some of those best sellers. Like, it is just coming at me left and right. And I'm thinking, I wanted, as an illustration, to hand out knives this morning. For obvious reasons, I did not choose that illustration because I'm afraid of some of your kids, be honest with you. I'll be honest with you, okay? I think I would get shanked by some of your kids. They'd be like, man, this is the coolest illustration ever. What's up, Pastor Tim? And I'd be like, okay, that's not what we were going for. But here's what I want you to think. When the god Mammon comes along, you need to put to death the god Mammon. You need to do whatever it takes to put to death the god Mammon, because he's coming after you to stoke your greed, rob you of all life and identity, and lead you somewhere where you don't want to go. If you got to shank that sucker, do whatever you got to do to confront the greed Mammon that is coming after you, the god Mammon that's coming after you daily, weekly, whatever it is. Do what you got to do. Now, here's what's cool. Is this best antidote to greed? The best antidote to counter the god Mammon is generosity. We actually have an answer. God has actually given us the knife. And the knife isn't to shank someone else, but it's generosity. It's to bless someone else. How many of you thought this week, hey, my eyes are kind of open now to people around me who may need something. Maybe this person needs $5. I don't know. I'm thinking some of these people staying on the street corner who are weathering the cold, I just want to give them something to say, man, that's tough. That's hard. I'm a backpacker. I know what it's like to backpack and camp in 32 degrees weather. This is even cooler and colder. And I'm in some ways, I'm like, man, I don't know how you do this. This is a lot. How many of you thought this week when you were buying food, you're like, hey, can I buy someone else's food? Can I buy coffee for someone? Can I give a generous tip? Can I have maybe I'm passing someone on the street corner or whatever it may be. How am I ready? Do I have it? I carry a $20, I probably shouldn't say this. Someone near me carries a $20 bill in their pocket. For emergencies, you never know. It's like, hey, this one parking lot only takes cash, and they're getting 20 from me. You don't ever know. But I'm also thinking, is this what I'm giving away? Is this what I'm giving away at the moment? Am I giving a 20 away? Do I need to go change this for a couple of 10s? Like, what am I doing? And I'm processing this. Why? Because I've got to put to death the God Mammon who is after me. And my way that God has given me to do that is through generosity. Being generous to others. He knows that I'm all about Tim. Tim is really good at being about Tim. Tim loves possessions and loves materials and loves things. I could tell you the things that you should buy versus the things you shouldn't buy. That's how gifted I am at things. And he knows that that is not good for my soul. Tim, be generous. Be generous. Practice generosity. The antidote to greed, to the God Mammon, is generosity. Now, I want us to practice. So if you guys can cue the worship pad in the back, the music in the back, I want us to practice. We did this last week. We can do it again this week. I asked you guys to get a tattoo of these 3 words. Remember these 3 words? Ruminate, activate, and evaluate. Ruminate, activate, and evaluate. I want to invite you just to close your eyes for a moment. And I want you to breathe deeply. I want you to think about the words that Jesus said in this passage. Think about what stood out to you the most this morning. How do you need to bring that before God? Now I want you to breathe deeply. In the sense of I want you to inhale deeply and exhale. I want you to listen to your voice. Your breath. Listen to your breath. What that does is that clears your mind of everything else that's going on. It allows your heart and soul to hear the voice of God. I want you to repeat these words silently. You are good. You are Father. You are enough. Everything I need, I have in you. And breathe in and breathe out. You are good. You are Father. You are enough. Everything I need, I have in you. You are good. You are Father. You are enough. Everything I have, everything I need, I have in you. We talked about how we need to ruminate, repeat, say those things over and over and over until our soul catches up to the truth of it. Why? Because this world is coming at us. This world is ruminating. This world is repeatedly going after what they think we need. You are good. You are Father. You are enough. Everything I need, I have in you. Now, as we activate, how do you need to put to death the god of mammon? How do you need to put to death the god of mammon in your life? Think about it. What's coming your way that you need to confront, that you need to address? And what's the antidote? Generosity. Who do you need to financially bless this week? Who do you wish you would have financially blessed this week, this last week? If you could have a do-over, what do you wish you would have done? Do you wish you would have paid for someone's meal? Do you wish you would have bought coffee for someone? Do you wish you would have had a $5 or $10 bill to give someone at the street corner? Do you wish you would have had a meal or a gift card to give someone? All right. You got another week. Well, unless the Lord comes back, you got another week. What do we need to do this week? Who do we need to financially bless this week to practice generosity for the sake of our souls? Now we need to evaluate. Thank you, God, for setting me free from the power of the god Mammon. Thank you, God, for blessing me so that I can bless others. How does this affect my heart, my soul? Who am I becoming? The antidote to greed is generosity. And the pursuit of generosity is the path to happiness. Ruminate, activate, evaluate. Take a moment just to offer up a personal prayer to God. And ask Him to go with you this week as you confront the god Mammon in your own life. And as you live with generous eyes rather than greedy eyes.